Hello! In this tutorial, I'll show you how to draw a gingerbread house in Procreate. We'll start by drawing the house, then we'll add some candy canes, and a peppermint walkway, and then we'll add a tree. I'll put the hexadecimals of the colors on the screen as we draw. So let's get started. I'm going to create a new canvas, so I'll tap on the plus sign and tap screen size. Now I'm going to open the layers, and I'll tap background color, and I'm going to make it this light blue-gray color. I'm going to open the brush libraries, and I need to access the classic library, so I'll pinch with 2 fingers, and then I'll tap on classic library. I'm going to get the monoline brush from the calligraphy set. I'm going to get a brown color to start. It doesn't really matter what size you make this brush. I'll make it 25%. And the opacity is 100%. Now I'm going to draw a square, and when I'm done drawing, I'll hold my Apple Pencil down to snap it into a square shape. And then I'll tap 1 finger on the screen to make it a perfect square. Or you can tap square at the top of the screen. You may need to redo this a few times to get it right. And now I'm going to fill it with this brown color. And now if you want, you can tap on the arrow and move this down a bit or resize it to make room for the roof. We'll also need some space below this to add some snow later. And now I'll create a new layer for the roof. I'm going to draw a triangle, and I'll keep my Apple Pencil held down to snap it into a triangle shape. Now I'll tap on the arrow, and I'll tap freeform. I have snapping toggled on, and I have the distance set to none, and the velocity set to 2.5. Now if I drag the blue node to the right, I can line it up with the house. And I can do the same on the left side. And I'll tap distort, and I'll move this point. And I may make this triangle a bit shorter. You can also move it around to better fit the house, and center it if you need to. And then when you're done, fill it with the brown color. Okay, so now I want to make the top of the roof, so I'm going to open my layers, and I'm going to duplicate this triangle. So swipe left on the triangle layer, and press duplicate. I'm going to fill this triangle with a different color. I'll use this light brown color. Now I'll go back into my layers, and I'm going to tap and hold on this layer until I can move it to the bottom of my layer stack. And now I'll tap on the arrow and tap uniform, and I'm just going to drag this top node so that I can resize this so I can see the top of the roof. Now let's make the chimney. I'll open my layers again, and I'm going to swipe left on the square layer and press duplicate. And now I'm going to move this layer under the other layers. I'll tap on the arrow, and I'll tap freeform. And I'm going to resize this into a vertical rectangle shape. And I'll make it much smaller. And I'll move it so that it forms the chimney. To make the top of the chimney, I'm going to open the layers again, and I'll duplicate this rectangle. I'll fill it with the color that I currently have in my color swatch, which is this light brown color. I'll tap on the arrow, and I'll tap rotate 45 degrees twice. So I'm going to move it to the top of this chimney, and I'm going to resize this so it's smaller and fits the chimney. And I'll center it on the chimney. Now I'm going to open my layers again, and I'm going to tap on this top triangle and tap merge down to merge it with the square. And I'm going to tap on this layer and tap rename, and I'll tap on this small keyboard down here and tap show keyboard, and I'll rename this layer house. So now I want to add some features to this house, like a door and some windows. So let's draw the door first. I'll tap on the house layer and press select. And then I'm going to create a new layer above it. Because it's selected, anything we draw will stay within the house. You can make the door any shape or color that you want. I'm going to use the light brown color I currently have selected, and I'll make this an oval-shaped door. So I'll draw half an oval, and I'll hold my Apple Pencil down to snap it into a more perfect shape. If you want, you can tap on the arrow and resize or reshape this. You can center it on the house using the snapping guides. And maybe I'll press Distort, and I'll move this node to move the top of the door. If you wanted, you could actually add a line to the bottom of the door and then fill it with color. I'm going to leave it as an outline. Okay, so let's make some windows next. I'll open my layers and create a new layer. I'll draw a square to the left side of the door, and when I'm done, I'll hold my Apple Pencil down to snap it into a shape. And then I'll tap one finger on the screen to make it a square. If you want, you can tap on the arrow and resize this window. I'm going to tap Freeform, and I'll resize this into more of a rectangular shape. And I'll tap Uniform, and I'll make it smaller. Then I'll move it into place. I'll add the lines to the window, and I'll hold my Apple Pencil down to snap them into straight lines, and then I'll tap one finger on the screen to make them vertical or horizontal. I'm going to get a yellow color, and I'll fill each section of the window with this color. Now maybe I'll get white for the color. You can get white by double tapping in the white area of the color disc. I'm going to add some reflections in the window by just drawing some little scribbles on the yellow part of the window. So I'm going to duplicate this window. I'll open my layers, and I'll swipe left on this window layer and press Duplicate. Now I'll tap on the arrow, and I'll move the duplicated window to the right side of the door. You can use the snapping guides to line it up with the other window. Now I want to add a window to the door, so I'll open my layers, and I'll duplicate this window, and I'll tap on the arrow. I'll make this window smaller and move it to the top of the door. Now I'm going to create a circular window at the top of the house. So I'll create a new layer, and I'll get that color I was using to draw the door and windows. And I'll draw a circle at the top of the house, and when I'm done, I'll hold my Apple Pencil down and tap one finger on the screen to make it a circle. Or you can tap Circle at the top of the screen. I'll add the lines to the window. And I'll tap on the arrow. I want it to be in the center of the house and towards the top. I'll use the snapping guides to help me line it up. I'll fill the sections of this window with yellow. And I'll get the white color and add some of those white lines in the window for reflections. Okay, so now I'm going to decorate this house. You can decorate it however you want. I'm going to draw icing on the house to add some decorations. So I'm going to tap on the house layer and press Select. And I'll create a new layer right above the house and below the windows and door. Now all of my decorations will stay on the house. I'm going to use white for the icing. You can draw any decorations you want on the house. So maybe I'll add some icing around this window. Because these are created with icing, these don't need to look perfect. Maybe I'll make it go around the door as well. So this is the fun part where you can really customize this however you want. I'll make a squiggly line under this window. And I'll add some dots to this line. I want to add a vine above this door, but I want to be able to duplicate it, so I'm going to open my layers, and I'll create a new layer. And anytime you want, you can create a new layer, so all of these decorations could be on separate layers if you wanted to do that. So I'll draw a vine coming out of the top right side of the door. And I'll add some leaves to it. Now to duplicate this, I'm going to open the layers, and I'll swipe left on this vine layer, and press duplicate. Now I'll tap on the arrow, and tap flip horizontal. And I can move this vine into place on the other side of the door. And now I'm going to do the same thing to add some vines to the bottom of the house. So I'll create a new layer, and I'll draw another vine coming out of the lower right side of the door. I'll duplicate this layer. I'll tap on the arrow, and I'll tap flip horizontal, and I'll move this vine to the other side of the door. Now I'll create a new layer. I'm going to draw a heart in the center of these two top vines. I'll fill it with the white color. And now I'm going to duplicate this heart layer. I'll tap on the arrow, and I'll use the green node to rotate the heart, and I'll move it over to the right. And then I'll duplicate this heart. I'll tap on the arrow, I'll tap flip horizontal, and I'll move this to the left side of the house. Now I'll create a new layer, and I'm just going to add some dots around these windows. Now I'll create a new layer, and I'm going to draw a line on the top of the house. Maybe I'll add some leaves to this line. Now I just want to decorate the door a bit, so I'll create another new layer. I'm going to add a doorknob, and I'll also add a horizontal line below the doorknob. If you want this to be a straight line, hold your Apple Pencil down after drawing it, and then tap one finger on the screen to make it horizontal. I'll also add some vertical lines to the door. When you're happy with how the decorations look, open the layers, and let's merge the icing layers together. You can just pinch with 2 fingers to merge them. So now I want to add some shading to the icing to give it some dimension. So I'll create a new layer above the icing. I'll tap on this layer, and tap clipping mask. Now anything we paint will stay on the icing. I'm going to get the soft airbrush from the airbrushing set. I'll get a light blue color. I'll make the size of my brush about 10%, and the opacity about 35%. You may need to use a different size or opacity depending on your decorations. I'm going to use very light pressure to add shading to this icing. Just add it here and there. I'll add it to the lower part of the hearts. And I'll add some to the leaves. And I'll add it on different parts of the lines. I'm going to keep it pretty subtle. Maybe I'll add shading around the door. And I'll add some around the windows. And I'll add shading on the doorknob and lines on the door. If you like how the shading looks, you can tap on the clipping mask layer and tap merge down. Now I want to add some texture and shading to the house itself to make it look more like gingerbread. So I'm going to tap on the house and I'll tap select. I'll create a new layer above the house and below the icing. I'm going to open the brushes and I'll pinch to access the Procreate library. I'll find the charcoal set and I'm going to get the firetail brush. I'm going to start with the light brown color that we used before. I'm going to make the size about 25% and the opacity 100%. And now I'm going to use very light pressure to add some shading to the front of this house. I'll lift up my Apple Pencil from time to time as I add this shading. Now if you want, you can create a new layer. I'll get an orange color. And I'm going to add some more shading. Now I'll create a new layer. I'll get a dark brown color. And I'll use the edge of the brush to add some shading around the sides of the house. You may need to adjust the size or opacity of the brush to get it to look how you want. I'll go under the roof as well. Don't make this too dark. I'm also going to add some of this around the windows. And I'll add some of this around the door. When you're done, you can open the layers and merge the shading layers together, but not the house layer. Now I'm going to add shading to the chimney in the same way. So I'll tap on this lowest rectangle layer, which is the chimney layer. I'll tap select. Then I'll make a new layer above this. We'll start with that light brown color again. I'll lightly add this to the chimney. I might do all of this shading on one layer. So I'm going to get that orange color. I'll add that to the chimney. And then I'll get that dark brown color. And I'll just put this around the edges of the chimney. When you're done, tap on the selection button to deselect the chimney. I think this house needs some snow on the top of it, so I'm going to create a new layer at the top of the layer stack. So tap on the top layer, and then create a new layer above it. I'm going to get the monoline brush again. I need to go back into the classic library, and I'll find the calligraphy set, and I'll get the monoline brush. This snow is going to be white. I'll draw some snow on the roof of the house. And I'll fill it with white. I'm also going to draw some snow on the top of the chimney. I'll fill that with white too. Now I'll create a new layer, and I'm going to add some snow to the bottom of the house. And I'll fill that with white. And I'm going to tap on the smudge tool, and I'll find the airbrushing set in the classic library, and I'll get the soft brush. I have the size set to about 8%, and the opacity is 100%. I'm just going to paint over the bottom of this snow and pull it down a bit to soften these edges and spread it out. I want to add some shading to this snow, so I'll create a new layer above this. I'll tap on it and tap Clipping Mask. And I'm going to find my soft airbrush again. I'll get that blue color. You may need to change the size or opacity of this brush to fit your snow. I'll make the brush size a bit larger. I'll use light pressure, and I'll pick up my Apple Pencil from time to time to add this shading. I'm mostly adding it to the bottom of the snow. And I'll add some shading throughout the snow as well. I like how this looks, so I'm going to open the layers. I'll tap on the shading layer and tap Merge Down. Now let's shade the snow on the top of the house and chimney. I'll create a new layer above this snow layer. And I'll tap on this layer and tap Clipping Mask. And now I'll reduce the size of my brush a bit. And I'll add some shading to the snow on the roof. And I'll add shading to the snow on the chimney. Now I'll open the layers. I'll tap on this layer and tap Merge Down. I want to add some powdery snow to this, so I'm going to create a new layer below the top snow layer. And I'll open my brushes. I need the Procreate library again. In the charcoals, I'm going to use the Underwood brush. I'll get white for the color. I have the brush size set to around 50%, and the opacity is around 50% as well. Now with light pressure, I'll add some powdered snow below this snow. Add as much as you want. And if you want, you can also add some to the front of the house. The basic house is done, so now I want to add some candy cane decorations. So to do this, we need to draw a candy cane. Let's create a new layer. And I'll move it below the powdered snow layer. I'm going to get the monoline brush again. So I need to go back to my classic library and go to the calligraphy set and get the monoline brush. I'll use white for the color. I'll make this brush size 100% and the opacity 100%. I'm going to draw a line, and when I'm done, I'll hold my Apple Pencil down to make a straight line, and I'll tap one finger on the screen to make it vertical. I'll create a new layer above this line. I'll draw a curve from the top of the line, and when I'm done, I'll hold my Apple Pencil down to snap it into a shape. And now if you tap on the arrow, you can move this or resize it if you need to. I think this looks like a good candy cane shape, so I'll open my layers, I'll tap on the curve layer, and tap Merge Down. If you need to clean this shape up at all, you can use the monoline eraser to do that. Or you could also paint in areas that aren't perfect. Now let's make the stripes on the candy cane. I'll tap on this candy cane layer and press Select. Then I'll create a new layer above it. I'll get a red color. I'm going to make the brush size around 80%. So starting from the bottom of this candy cane, I'm going to make diagonal stripes going up. Try to space these evenly. As you get to this curve, you're going to have to change the stripe direction. Okay, now I'm going to shade the candy cane. So without deselecting this, I'll create a new layer and I'll move it underneath the stripes. I'm going to get my soft airbrush again. And I'll get the blue color again. I'm going to make the brush size about 15%. I'm going to add the shading toward the right side of the candy cane. I'll just use light pressure and I'll follow the shape of the candy cane. Now I need to add this shading to the stripes. So I'll tap on the stripes layer and tap select. And I'll create a new layer above it. I'm going to get that red color again, but I'm going to drag down on my color disc to make it darker. And now I'll add the shading to the stripes in the same area as I added it to the candy cane. I'll tap on the selection button to deselect this. Now I'll open my layers, and I can pinch these 4 candy cane layers together to merge them. I'll tap on this layer and tap rename. I'm going to call this candy cane. I want to make a copy of this candy cane, so I'll swipe left on this layer and press duplicate. I'm going to turn off the visibility on my original candy cane layer. Now we can modify this duplicated candy cane without changing the original one. Now I'll tap on the arrow, and I'm going to move this candy cane in front of the house. I'll resize it to be smaller. I'll use the green node to rotate it. And I'll move it to the right to make room for another candy cane. So now I want another candy cane in front of the house, so I'm going to duplicate this candy cane layer. I'll tap on the arrow, I'll tap flip horizontal, and I'll move it. I want to group these 2 candy canes together, so I'll open my layers, and I'll swipe right on the lower candy cane and press group. Now I'll swipe left on the new group layer and press duplicate. Now I can tap on the arrow, and I'll tap flip horizontal, and I'll move these candy canes to the left of the house. Okay, so now I want to make a candy walkway. First I need to make a peppermint candy. I want to create a new layer at the top of the layer stack. I'll get white for the color. I'll get the monoline brush again. It doesn't really matter what brush size you use, but I'm going to make this smaller, maybe 20%. Now I'll draw a circle, and I'll hold my Apple Pencil down and then tap with one finger on the screen to make it a perfect circle. And I'll fill this circle with white. Now I'm going to create a new layer above this. I'll get red for the color. I'm going to draw a triangle that's upside down with a point in the center of the circle, and the base of the triangle should go a little above the circle. I'll fill this with the red color. Now tap the arrow and tap freeform, and you can resize this to be a narrow triangle, and make sure it's centered on the circle. We need more of these triangles, so I'm going to duplicate this triangle layer. I'll tap on the arrow. I'll tap on this green node. I want the angle to be 60 degrees. Wait for this to spin, and then you can move it into place next to the other triangle. Try to get the triangles to meet in the center. I'm going to duplicate this triangle. I'll tap on the arrow, and again I'll rotate this 60 degrees. I'll move this so the triangles meet in the center of the circle. I'm going to group these 3 triangles together, so I'll swipe right on the 2 lower triangles, and I'll press group. And now I'll swipe left on this new group layer and press duplicate. And I'll tap on the arrow and tap flip horizontal and then flip vertical. And I can move this into place on the other side of the circle. I want all of these triangles to be on the same layer, so I'm going to open my layers and I'll pinch to merge these layers together. To make this look more like candy, I need to distort these triangles. So I'll tap on the Adjustments button, and I'll tap Liquify. At the bottom of the screen, I'll tap Twirl Left. My settings are that the size is 35%, the pressure is max, the distortion is none, and the momentum is 5%. Now I'll use my finger to tap and hold in the center of the circle for a moment to twirl these. I don't want to spin this too much, so if you need to, you can undo and try again. When you like how this looks, open the layers again. I want to erase the parts of the triangles that are outside of the circle. I'm going to tap on the circle layer and I'll tap Select. At the bottom of the screen, I'll tap Invert to select everything outside of the circle. I'll tap on the triangle layer and press Clear. Now this looks more like a piece of candy. To give this candy more dimension, I'm going to duplicate the circle layer. I'll tap on the lower circle, and I'll get that light blue color that we used to shade the candy cane. I'm actually going to make this a lighter color by dragging up on the color disc. And I'll fill the lower circle with this color. And now I'll tap on the arrow, and I'll resize this lower circle so that I can see it below and to the right of the top circle. You can make the candy as thick as you want. Okay, so I want these stripes to come down onto the lower circle. So I'm going to tap on the lower circle layer and tap Select, and I'll create a new layer above it. I'm going to get that red color again. And I'm going to extend these stripes down onto the lower circle. I'll use the brush to fill them in. To shade this candy, I'm going to create a new layer above the lower circle, but below the extra stripes. And I'm going to get the soft airbrush again. I'm going to start with that blue color, but I'm going to make it darker by dragging down on the color disc. I'll add some of this dark shading to the lower part of this circle. You may need to adjust the size of your brush to do this. I'll use light pressure to add this shading. Now I want to shade these lower stripes. So I'll tap on the lower stripe layer and tap Select. And I'll create a new layer above it. I'll get that dark red color that we used to shade the candy cane. And I'll shade the bottom of these stripes as well. And now I want to add a white edge to the top of the candy. So I'm going to tap on the triangle swirl layer, and I'll tap Merge Down. Now I'll tap on this layer, and I'll tap Select. Then I'll create a new layer above this. I'm going to get white for the color. And I'll size this brush down very small, to maybe 4%. I just want to add a thin line along the edge of the candy. This will be mostly on the stripes because you can't see it on the white circle. Okay, so now I'm going to merge all of these candy layers together. I'll just pinch to merge them together. I'll tap on this layer and tap Rename, and I'll call this Candy. I want a copy of this, so I'll swipe left on this layer and press Duplicate. And I'll turn off the original candy layer. Now I want to resize this candy so it looks more flat for the walkway. So I'll tap on the arrow. With Freeform selected, if I drag the lower node up, I can make this candy a bit flatter. You can tap Uniform and resize this to make it smaller. Now I want to place this candy in front of the house to make the walkway. Now I need more candies for this walkway, so I'll open my layers, and I'll duplicate this layer. And I'll tap on the arrow, and I'll move this candy into place on the walkway. Now I'm going to add one more candy, so I'll open my layers, I'll duplicate this layer, and I'll move it into place on the walkway. Add as many candies as you want to this walkway. Okay, the house is almost done. I just want to add a gingerbread tree. I'll make this using a similar method to the method we used to make the house. So let's create a new layer. I'll move this layer below my candy canes. I'm going to get the monoline brush again. I'll get the brown color that we drew the house with. To make the top of the tree, I'm going to draw a triangle. And I'll hold my Apple Pencil down to snap it into a triangle shape. I'll fill this with the brown color. I want to modify this shape, so I'll tap on the arrow. I'll tap Warp, and then Advanced Mesh. I want the sides of the triangle to curve in a bit, so I'll drag these side nodes inwards to get it to do that. And you can tap Freeform, and you can resize this to be wider or narrower. So I'm going to duplicate this layer. I'll move this duplicated layer underneath the other triangle. I'll tap on the arrow. I'll move this below the top of the tree. And I'll tap Uniform and make it larger. And I'll line it up. Now I'll duplicate this layer. I'll move it below this lower tree layer. I'll tap on the arrow. I'll move this down, and I'll make it larger, and I'll line it up. Let's make one more. So I'll duplicate this layer. I'll move it below the other triangles. I'll tap on the arrow, and I'll move and resize this triangle. Now I'm going to merge these triangles together, so I'll just pinch them together to merge them. I want to add texture to this tree in the same way as we did with the house. So I'll tap on this layer and tap Select. And I'll create a new layer above it. I need to find the charcoal brushes in the Procreate library. I'll get the Firetail brush. And now I'm going to get that light brown color. Now I'll use light pressure to shade this tree, and I'll pick up my Apple Pencil a few times as I do this. Now I'll create a new layer. I'll get that orange color, and I'll add this to the tree. I think that's looking more like gingerbread. And now I'll create a new layer, and I'll get the dark brown color. You may need to resize this brush to add the shading to the tree. I'll add this lightly around the edges of the tree. I'm done adding texture, so I'll deselect the tree. I'm going to merge the shading layers together, but not the tree layer. So I want to add some snow to this tree. Let's create a new layer. I'm going to go back to the classic brush library. I'll get my monoline brush again. I'm going to get white for the color. I'll draw some snow on the top of the tree. And I'll fill it in with white. To add the snow to the branches, I'll increase my brush size to 100%. Now I'll just draw some thick lines on these branches and try to make them look like snow. Now I want to shade this snow, so I'll create a new layer above this. I'll tap on this layer and tap Clipping Mask. I'll go to the airbrushing set and get the soft airbrush again. And I'll get the light blue color that we used to shade the snow. I think I'll size this brush up a bit, to maybe 15%. And now I'll just add some shading to the snow. So I'll add this lightly, and I'll pick up my Apple Pencil from time to time. I'm mostly adding this to the lower part of the snow, in the same way that we did with the other snow. If you want, you can add some decoration to this tree. So maybe I'll create a new layer. I'll get my monoline brush, and I'll get that yellow color. I'll size this brush down. And now I can draw a star on top of the tree. I'll fill it with the yellow color. And I'll move it so it fits the tree. Okay, so now I want to resize this tree and move it, so I'm going to group these tree layers together. I'll open my layers. I'll swipe right on the tree layers below the star. And I'll tap Group. I'll tap New Group. I'll tap on the arrow. And now I can move this and resize it. Now if you want to add more decorations to the house, you can do that. Maybe add a gingerbread man up front, add some more candy to the front of the house. You can make lots of houses this way. I hope you enjoyed making this gingerbread house. Thank you for watching.